As soon as she saw it, she knew she found something special. There was something about the cool air and the warm, clear water that spoke to her. And from that point on, Elena Rodriguez knew that this was a place where she wanted to be. Lago de Quiroz, or Quiroz Lake, is a series of natural springs located 8 miles from the city of Zamora in the state of Michoacan in Mexico. And from the early 1900s to the day she died in 1997, it was a place she never forgot.
Quiroz is a very special memory for me, as well as for the entire family. Beautiful foliage, always green. And it's basically a picnic area where a lot of families will gather. You go on the boats, travel throughout the lake. There's mariachis or there's trios playing love songs. The one that would always organize our outings to Quiroz was Elena Rodriguez Quiroz, our grandmother. To her, it was always important to gather the family, to get together at least once a summer, to go out to Quiroz and celebrate family.
It was this emphasis on family and togetherness that always stayed with Helena. It was this core belief that would give her the strength to uproot her life and embark on a journey that she never expected to take.
I think she had a hard life. Well, in the blockhouse, it was cold. It was very cold because we didn't have no hot heat, hot water.
At that time, back in the 20s, I mean, it was hard. It was hard for everybody. And then, of course, when depression set in, it was even worse yet.
Because we were poor. We didn't know we were poor, but we were poor. Like I say, she was always working, doing something. I don't know how she did it, but she did. She took care of us, and
Anybody that needed a hand up and out, she was there for them if she could do it.
She was persistent on feeding us, taking care of us with schooling and things like that. She wanted us to she would speak to us in Spanish, and she would want us to talk to her in English instead of Spanish, because she would learn how to speak English too.
Despite the adventure, there was also lasting heartbreak.
Well, with my mom, she had a child born in Mexico. She had no other recourse. What was she going to do? There was nothing except for her to beg in the streets.
We loved Ma, and everybody in the neighborhood always called my mother Ma, and they loved her, and they respected her.
To me, Grandma always spoke about her life here in the United States, here in Chicago, but she really didn't mention much of her childhood.
She worked for restaurants also. When a person didn't finish their food on their plate, she would always save that little piece of meat that was left over. Take it home, for the kids, or else put it on the side for maybe beef stew.
And he was the one that told Manuel, she really wasn't your mother. Your real mother is in the United States. My mom was born in La Sauceda, Michoacan, which is a small little town close to Zamora, Michoacan. And she was born on December 23rd, 1906.
Elena Rodriguez was born in a country on the brink of war and instability. The end of the 1800s saw 2 decades of relative peace in Mexico. But the start of the 1900s, just as she was born, saw political turmoil in China, Russia, and elsewhere. Mexico erupted too. It It was a deluge of political corruption, chaos, and violence that ultimately claimed nearly 2 million victims. A cataclysmic revolution that changed Elena, her family, and her country forever.
My mother's family they were born on a ranch in South Sena. It's a suburb of a little village suburb of Zamora.
Her parents his name was Francisco. Her mother's name was Maria.
And I remember her seeing her where she would make her tortillas with her little bucket on top of her head, going to where they grind the corn. And she would make them every day. Every day she would do this. And I'd always hear the pitter-patter of her hands in the morning, because that would wake me up. Because I would hear her, that little pitter-patter of making the tortillas by hand on her little stove that she had, a little wooden stove.
He was a horse breeder. He had horses, and they sold eggs and chickens and stuff like that.
Somehow I remember like maybe 17 or 18 kids, and a lot of them died. A lot of them died early on. And so basically what was left, I believe it was 6 children that survived.
And she had, let me see, 1, 2, 3 sisters and 2 brothers.
She had sisters named Ana, Shole, Lupita.
Then the boys were Alfonso and Luis.
When I went, it was a very, very poor town. They didn't even have bathroom facilities. You just went out into the back field and you did your business wherever you can find a place. I remember lots of flies, and I remember my mom saying, don't eat this, don't eat that, and just being very cautious. But it was a very, very poor town.
But from there, from La Sauceda, they moved to Zamora, Michoacan as a family due to our great-grandfather, Francisco Rodriguez, wanting to better the life of his family. That's when they moved and purchased a bigger house.
And the house that they bought was an old gambling casino. They found human bones in the backyard there, like it was people that didn't pay their dues, or maybe they gave them trouble or something like that. Not my grandfather owned it, was other people that owned that as a casino.
Maria, their mother would make tortillas, corn tortillas, the old-fashioned way, patting them down. So everybody had a job to do.
The oldest sibling, the oldest sister, was Ana, and she pretty much became the leader. Okay, she was the controller. She administered the funds of the family.
Ana, she was the one that was in charge of the finances. She took in all the money, she went to the bank.
Yeah, Anita was in charge of finances, whatever money came in.
I remember it was a big thing for my Aunt Anna to go to the bank, and I remember her waking up, and I remember her going to the sink and washing up and combing her hair and getting her good clothes on, and then we would walk to the bank, and then she would do all of her bank work and then come back and then change into her old house dress. And
Soledad would do cooking, all the time cooking.
Then it was Soledad. and Soledad was the cook. And she was always a happy-go-lucky person also. So we called her Chole. Tia Chole.
Chole, she was the one who cooked. She did it really well, too. I especially liked her chicken soup. Oh, she made it so well.
Then we had Tia Lupe. She was the one that always did, like the grocery shopping or going to the market or helping prepare meals.
And Guadalupe, she would make tamales to sell, and she would go to the grocery store.
Well, Lupe, when she got older, she was the youngest of the girls. When she got older, she would go to the market and she would purchase things for the house.
But from the three sisters that Grandma had, they each had a different role, but they all worked together. And then, of course, they had the two brothers, Alfonso and Luis, which they were pretty much the money makers. And they would go about their business making bricks.
They made bricks out of mud and straw, and they would place these bricks in a huge, like a Quonset hut, it would look like. And there would be fire in there, of course, and they would burn the bricks to a certain degree, and then they would sell their bricks.
And they would sell their bricks for people to build their homes. And they would also have a sale in the middle of their living quarters, not their main living quarters, but where the animals came through. They would sell milk and they would sell charcoal for like barbecues. So it was always very interesting, but kind of a scary experience with all the animals because, as I stated, it was goats, chickens, cats.
Aside from that, he also had cows and horses and pigs and chickens and turkeys in the back of this house that he purchased. And they would sell eggs, and they would, sell the pigs once they got big and fat enough, to be sold. And they would do that. And they would also sell coal. They had some guy that would come twice a week, and he would have a burro, and on this poor burro was stacks and stacks of coal. And he would sell it to my grandfather, and in turn my aunts would sell that at the door. They'd sell it to anybody who needs coal, little sticks of coal for their needs for cooking. Well, with my mom, she had a child born in Mexico, and his name is Manuel. And from what Manuel told me one time, he said that, wow, it's kind of difficult. But anyhow, he said that my aunts, my mom and Chole and Ana, were asked by a family friend of my grandpa's. The friend said, "Hey, have your kids come on over to my ranch, and they can play with my kids, And so my grandpa said, yeah, the girls can go. And then the girls went, and they were playing with this other guy's kids and things like that. And I don't know how many times they went over there to play. But what had happened was this friend of my grandpa's kind of seduced my mom, and she had a child born out of wedlock. He was born in 1925. It was very difficult for my grandpa to grasp this whole idea of what had happened, And he sent my mother out of the house, and he didn't want to speak to her. He says, I don't have you as a child anymore. So she was out on her own, and she was befriended by somebody who eventually took her child. My mom went to work for this lady in Jacona, and the woman really liked the little boy, Manuel. He was about 2 years old, when the woman took over. At one point, she told my mom, to leave. She didn't want her here anymore, but the boy was going to stay there with her. And my mom didn't know what to do. And in those days, you can't go to the police and say she's taking my son. Whoever has more money, and this woman did have money, and whoever has more money for bribes or anything like that. She had no other recourse. What was she going to do? There was nothing except for her to beg in the streets. So she took this journey with my dad.
My dad was Felix Quiroz. The reason he moved to Zamora was because he wanted to open up a bakery and make bread, and he knew how to make bread. So that's why he was in Zamora.
And seen her sweeping the streets. She was outside sweeping the front of their house. And it was love at first sight. Her and Grandpa had gone to this mountain, and they were riding horseback. And that there was a priest there, and he would marry these couples. They definitely wanted to be together, and that's how they got married.
Then they decided to come to the United States, where the living was better. He already had a job here at Sherwin-Williams.
She came to the United States because my dad was already in the United States, and he sent for her. And she migrated from Mexico to the United States.
She came here to the United States, to a different country. I imagine it was hard on her. It had to be hard. Not knowing the language, going to a new country, it had to be hard. I remember my dad telling me that it was hard for him too, because when he came here, he didn't eat a meal. Because his only words that he knew was coffee and donuts. And, he would go into a restaurant. Of course, he would want to order, but he couldn't order because he didn't know the language. So he would just order a coffee and a donut, or go to places where they only made coffee and donuts. Wouldn't go to a restaurant, because the restaurants you're going in there and you gotta ask for whatever you want to eat. And I remember him telling me that a lot of times he would go without a meal because of the language barrier.
They moved to Chicago, Illinois, Pullman, Illinois. They lived on Langley Ave. That was a poor people's street on Langley Ave, and there was a lot of apartments, one, 2 room apartments.
They had 6 kids in Pullman. Helen, my eldest sister, was born in 1930. Then came Celia, 32. Esther, 34. Alfonso, 36. And then Ray, 38. And me, 42.
She managed it. I don't know how she did it, but she did. She took care of us and fed us and everything, so we were well taken care of by my mom. And my dad provided. It was hard though, because we were poor. We didn't know we were poor, but we were poor. Yeah.
Lived on Langley in one of the blockhouses. Well, in the blockhouse, it was cold. It was very cold because we didn't have no hot heat. I remember we lived on, I think, on the 3rd floor, but everything was cold flat.
We had no bathrooms in the inside apartment.
In order to go to the bathroom, you had to walk down the hallway, and then there were 3 stalls.
We had to go in the hallway to go to the washroom.
And then the bathrooms were outside, and it was sort of hard in the winter time because it would get cold there. And then just cold water.
Cold water, no hot water. And we had outside bathrooms, stalls, and outside sink, like a tub sink. We never took a shower. We took a bath in the kitchen next to the potbelly stove. We got a tub, and we put hot water in there. We took a bath in the tub.
And I remember taking a bath, and after I took a bath, somebody else would take a bath.
And my sisters would take a bath first, and then, without throwing out the water, I would wash myself second, third time in the same hot water.
It was nasty. Bedrooms, we had to sleep together, as far as the girls had to sleep all together and the boys had to sleep together. And it was always cold.
And we always lived on the 3rd floor because no one never wanted to live on the 3rd floor, so we were the only ones that lived up there.
I says, how did you all fit in one apartment in the blockhouse? And she would say, no. She says, Pa rented 2 apartments in the blockhouse. She says, I remember they would live in one apartment and then some of the kids would be in the other. She says, but we all gathered for meals in one place.
We rented 2 apartments because there were so many kids, okay? So the 2 apartments, one apartment was the kitchen and 2 bedrooms.
We had 2 bedrooms and a kitchen. And the kitchen was combined with a dining room.
We would sleep in beds, and then my brothers would sleep in their beds too, because it was only 2 bedrooms and then the kitchen in the living room.
My younger sister slept with my mom and dad, and my other sisters would sleep together in one bedroom, and we would sleep in another off the kitchen, my brother and I, in bunk beds.
Very dismal and very, very poor, because we didn't have heat. We had to heat the apartment up, mostly the living room, with a potbelly stove.
In this building here, we lived on the 3rd floor. And Uncle Ray, we were on the 3rd floor, and we used to go up and down the fire escapes, climb on it like monkey bars, And there was one fire escape step was broken, and he fell, and he cut his lip or something.
I remember my mom telling me, don't go down the fire. We lived on the 3rd floor, of course. We lived on the 3rd floor. And on the 3rd floor, there was fire escapes that were on the outside of the building. And there was a step missing on the 3rd floor. And I remember my mom saying to me, don't go down the stairs because there's a stair missing. Please don't go down. And of course, like other little brats, kids, you didn't pay that much attention. But anyways, when I went walking down the stairs, and the stair that was missing, I remember her telling me about that, and I jumped. I tried to jump and try to get the other step, and I missed it. My foot hit the step, and I went down and fell all the way to the 1st floor. In the meantime, when I fell through the step, it picked up my nose. The step picked up my nose and it ripped it. And I have the scar right here. I still have it. And I think I was about, well, I don't know, I think about 5 years old or something like that.
And one time we went to the show, it was with my two sisters at the Normal Theater, I think it was. And we watched this Shirley Temple movie over and over again.
You're not a good woman. You're crazy. You've got to be good to get stuff like this and need hard times.
And it got late. By the time we got home, we met my dad at it was a streetcar. We would travel on streetcars. And he gave us a sort of a spanking. That's the only time my dad ever raised his hands to us. We were late and they worried. They thought we would be home at a certain time, and we kept on watching that movies over and over again, so it got dark.
We used to play in the dumps, at the city dumps, because there was a farm at the edge of the dump, which was called, it was Happy. The guy's name was Happy. It was a guy that owned land there behind Sherwin-Williams. But anyways, we were on the dumps. We're looking for different things, toys or anything like that. And I'll never forget a submarine. It was a metal submarine that I found, and Elle wanted to take it. He wanted to take it. Elle wanted to take it from me. And I said, that's mine. And we kept on arguing back and forth, and before I knew it, he threw it at me. He says, here, it's yours. And he threw it at me, and I still had the scar right here. Right here, here's the scar where he hit me in the head with the submarine.
My dad had a garden behind the blockhouse. Tomatoes, corn, cilantro, and peppers.
The cilantro was raised in his victory garden because it was sort of like when the World War II was on.
If we are to win the war, what can we do? Victory Garden.
But the majority of times he ate over at his little victory garden because he had a little hut there.
And he had he built himself a little shed there, and he would grow things like cilantro, chiles. I would go and help him there, and nobody else would. The boys would go once in a while, but that's when they had to. But I would always help him there.
And he has a little stove there. He would make his own meals. He lived more there in his little victory garden more than he did at home. He enjoyed it. But not only that, he enjoyed it because really it was a necessity too, because there's an extra income coming in. There's extra money.
He loved to jar peppers, and we would all get together and have turns doing peppers and jarring them and all that.
A lot of people like those peppers. And I remember there was, at the table, we all organized around the table, and somebody would have the peppers, and they would prick it with a pin and so that when it was in the jar full of vinegar and whatever else my dad put in there, it would seep into the pepper. My dad would get up really early in the morning, go to work, come back home maybe about 2:30, 3 o'clock, and immediately go to his garden and work on the garden until late at night.
He would take them to work, and he would sell them like on the side, like that, in a little wagon.
And year in, year out, if need be, with our own hands, we can grow the gardens of victory.
Her first job was at a restaurant washing dishes.
She worked in a restaurant on 111th and Cottage Grove area as a dishwasher in a restaurant.
and she worked over here for a guy called Pete's. Is on the other side of the viaduct on 111th Street by the Illinois Central. She worked there for years. Of course, she'd bring home some food from the restaurant where she worked at because either they threw it out or they saved it for the following day. Like say they may make a beef stew or some sort of a stew out of leftover meat, and there was nothing wrong with that. A little piece of meat or a little piece of bread or something like that, or leftover donuts or whatever that was left over, even coffee. She'd bring home in a mason jar. I remember that.
And then that restaurant closed.
After the restaurant closed, she got a job across the Cottage Grove to Hotel Florence as a housemaid. She got the job through a guy that sold newspaper underneath the bridge on 111th Street. He was a bookie, and he knew a lot of people, so he helped her along to getting the job there.
Then she went to work for the Hotel Florence as a maid first, and then she became a boss there.
She was a maid. She worked at the Florence Hotel, which is a famous hotel in Pullman. She eventually became the head housekeeper there.
And eventually she became a supervisor, and she had 2 or 3 people working underneath her.
And later on, Mrs. Fisher, which is the owner of the Hotel Florence, asked her if she would be willing to accept this other job where she'd be in charge of all the other people that were working in there. And at first she didn't want to because of the language barrier. But Mrs. Fisher told her, "You're doing that job anyway, so get paid for it." So she did that. She took the position of the head person of the hotel. Yeah.
White rain, use new white rain shampoo tonight, and tomorrow your hair will be sunshine bright.
There was a grocery store in the neighborhood. It was called Simonini's, and they had 2 daughters, and Grandma would always iron for them. And the owner of the store would always pay Grandma a couple of dollars, and she would make ends meet by ironing their clothes, side jobs she would do.
The Simonini's, there was a grocery store in the middle of the block, and there's an Italian grocery store, and my mother used to go to the grocery store, and she would speak to the owner in Spanish. In Italian language, it's almost identical in Spanish, where a lot of the words are almost identical. And my mother used to point at all the items that she wanted to buy in the grocery. Around Christmas time, my mother used to make a big bowl of tamales, and she would bring them over to the grocery store, and the woman that owned the grocery store would make a big pot, a big bowl of raviolis and exchange the meals. And we were very happy to get that. We were really happy. First time I ate Italian food.
At Christmas time, they would swap. My mother would give her tamales, and the lady would give her homemade raviolis. So that was nice.
My mom was happiest preparing meals. She would enjoy going to the food store and getting, the vegetables and all the meats and everything. She's happy in the kitchen stirring a pot of whatever.
Well, she cooked food that was left over for the following day, and then she would reheat it, and she would make a new meal out of leftovers.
She loved to cook, and during holidays she would cook tamales, tostadas, or enchiladas. She would make the favorite tortillas.
She would make homemade tortillas for us all the time.
She would love to make flour tortillas by hand. The grandchildren, we would line up in the kitchen just waiting for that fresh tortilla to come off the comal, and she would take it and put a little butter and roll it up and hand it to each one of us. So we each had to wait our turn to get that freshly made tortilla from her.
I remember my brother, I remember him telling my mom, "Mom, don't make the tortillas. Why? You don't have to do that," while he's eating them. Don't make any. You don't have to. And then he's still slobbering. You know, I had to laugh at that because he's telling her not to make them, and yet he's eating them.
She would make tortillas in the morning, you know. She would be creative and make meals like that for us. She would create leftovers. And every time she would cook leftovers, she would make a new meal out of it. And that was really good.
We didn't have very much money, so it was very simple. Eggs and potatoes with tortillas, frijoles. And sometimes we would have, meat, steak, but not very often.
Chile con carne was very good. Her beans were delicious. Yeah.
Grandma always made the most delicious chicken soup. To her, that was a gourmet meal for her family. I clearly remember that we would be in the dining room on a Sunday. We would all gather and they'd have meals, and then at the end of the meal, there was always this joyous occasion about being together with family that they would push the dining room table over to the side and put on music. And I remember the mambo with Pérez Prado. And I remember my mother and my aunts and my uncles, including myself as a little girl, just dancing in that dining room and having a fantastic time. So, as I stated, family was very close to each other.
We loved Ma, and everybody in the neighborhood always called my mother Ma. And they loved her, and they respected her, really.